This is probably one of the best instant noodles I've ever— Wait, I'm not supposed to be here. Shouldn't I be on the cargo ferry heading to Yakushima? This is the cargo ferry Hibiscus bound for Yakushima. It was cancelled due to unfavorable weather conditions. And you know what's also unfavorable right now? My trip. The journey to Yakushima was supposed to be one of the highlights of this whole adventure. I'd planned every detail so carefully, and now it feels like none of it was meant to be. In total denial, I rushed straight to the ticket office hoping to get some reassurance. Maybe the ferry wasn't really cancelled, just delayed, right? But the sliver of hope got snuffed out more quickly than a candle in a storm. The ferry won't run, and there's no other way to reach Yakushima tonight. That was the cold, hard truth I had to face. To be fair, I was well aware of the uncertainties of this trip. Transport and logistics in the less touristy areas of Japan can get pretty hectic, and Kyushu is known for its occasional natural disasters, which certainly doesn't help at all. I've had my fair share of missed trains and ruined schedules, but dragging myself across the countryside with a sore foot, carrying a heavy backpack, only to be shot down at the last second for something I'd been eagerly anticipating for weeks, that was still a very bitter pill to swallow. It was incredibly tempting to just let myself collapse mentally for a moment. But the sun was setting, there were choices to be made, and they needed to be made fast. I was already exhausted, but the fast travel beacon back to Kagoshima was still a 30-minute walk away, and I couldn't find a single taxi on any taxi apps. So I needed to find somewhere to sit down first, and then plan my next move. I mean, why lick your wounds when you can lick strawberry-flavored shaved ice topped with soft-serve ice cream instead? There was a cafe conveniently across the street, and this delicious bowl of sweet retreat was part of their limited-time summer menu, which ends tomorrow. I felt a whole lot better already. Now we have a few decisions to make. The biggest question now is, do I still make a run for Yakushima? Going there tonight is no longer a possibility, but there will be options opening up tomorrow morning. However, that means I wouldn't reach the island as early. My time to actually explore will be even shorter. As I scrolled through my phone, things got even worse. The trail I had planned to hike had been crippled by the typhoon overnight, and the bus I needed to get to the trailhead was suspended indefinitely. Technically, there were still ways to make it work, but at that point, it felt like I was pushing it further and further. The itinerary would need to be held together by miracles for everything to go off without a hitch. So, I had to fold. I know when to take a hint, and this was a gamble I couldn't win. I'd already lost more than half a day on this, and it would be unwise to spend another just to chase a fleeting dream. One day, I will take that cargo ferry through the darkest night sky.
But it is not this day.
This day we catch the train back to Kagoshima, and this was probably the single best decision I've made on that journey. Stay with me, and you'll see. I set off toward the train station in the fading twilight. There were still a few obstacles to sort out, but I figured we could work through them on the way. I have an unhealthy obsession with the sense of loneliness when I travel solo. On its own, loneliness doesn't do much, but if you let it settle in, it gradually strips away the background noise, leaving you 100% immersed in the moment. It's not that I don't enjoy good company, but if I were with a group of friends, I might not have the time to appreciate the calmness of a random workshop by the side of the road, and I might miss how the asphalt glimmered like a sea of stars beneath the streetlight. My camera makes it look a lot brighter than it actually was, and I really had to hurry. That train was my only way out. As much as I was enjoying the vibes, I definitely didn't want to get stuck here for the night. Speaking of staying the night, since I was supposed to be on the cargo ship right now, I hadn't booked a hotel, but I managed to snag a decent room in Kagoshima. It was a little pricier than I'd usually go for when traveling solo, but after a full day of highs and lows, I figured I'd earned a bit of luxury. After half an hour, I finally made it back to the station. A group of students was having way too much fun running up and down the footbridge, and the local Obasan had to step in to give them a good talking to. One thing I don't particularly enjoy about the countryside is that, way too often, there's only one way in and one way out. If I missed the last train here, I'd have to spend the night at the nearest sketchy love hotel as mandated by law, which isn't ideal because their body soap collection is trash. Fortunately, my train showed up only 15 minutes late, right as I was descending into madness, but it came. For that, I was grateful. So, I was back at Kagoshima Chuo, or Kagoshima Central Station. In the morning, when I set out in search of adventure with that picture, I didn't have time to step outside. I had no real sense of what the city was actually like. To be honest, I didn't expect much. Yes, there's an active volcano right in the middle of the city, which is impressive, sure. But you know what's also on my itinerary a few days down the road? A bigger volcano. The biggest in Japan, actually. So nice try, Kagoshima, but you better come up with something else. Still, it felt a bit cruel to dismiss Kagoshima without giving it a fair chance. Now that I was stranded here, I might as well see what's on offer. I've always had the most unexpected journeys when I keep an open mind and seek adventure where there seems to be none, and I've never been disappointed, so I'm not afraid to give it another shot. My first impression of Kagoshima was oddly familiar. Squeaky clean streets with almost a metallic sheen.
Check.
Canopied shopping arcades stretched deep into the sides of the main road.
Check.
Neon banners for karaoke boxes at every corner.
Check.
And all these set against the gentle hum of light traffic and the jingle of pedestrian signals, which I dubbed the symphony of the normal Japan urbanscape. What's interesting about Kagoshima is that instead of a subway system, the city runs on trams, which has always been a bit of a novelty to me. It's always exciting to ride one of these. What's not so exciting, however, is that the standard IC cards used across the country aren't accepted here. So if you plan to visit, make sure to have some cash on hand. You are going to need it. My hotel wasn't far from the station, so it was a short ride. After checking in, this was my room for the night, a cozy little studio that had everything for a fire truck. It would have been easy to grab a few beers and call it a night, but something inside me wanted to see more of Kagoshima before I hit the hay. So after a quick shower, I set out once more to wander into the night.
35mm.
The streets of Kagoshima clearly showed age, but they did so not without grace. The arched walkways exuded an aura of quaint nostalgia, and the soft orange glow from the sodium lamps pushed everything further down memory lane. Knowing Japan, I'm pretty sure these streets wouldn't have looked too different 50 years ago. Despite it being quite late, the trams were still busy putting people in their places. The screeching of the rails was harsh against the quiet night, but it was a rare audio motif that's unique to Kagoshima that I find oddly comforting. The most famous shopping street in Kagoshima is Tenmonkan, which translates to observatory or astronomy hall. It was disappointing that the name is merely honoring the district's legacy. The observatory is long but gone, and the street is no different from any other shopping arcade in Japan. But observatory or not, Kagoshima had already revealed its charms that's not found anywhere else. Wandering through the streets felt like stepping into a vintage camera shop. Everything was old yet carefully preserved and full of life. I no longer feel bad about Yakushima, and I cannot wait for tomorrow. Hey, you're awake. While you were asleep, I've managed to get the refund for the return trip from Yakushima so we can start exploring right away. With the refund sorted out, I was originally planning to visit a wind farm on top of the mountains to the north and hike a trail there. But my feet hadn't fully recovered and I was having a hard time walking. I didn't want to push myself too hard and potentially ruin everything I've planned down the line. Guess I'll have to find something more laid back. But the September sun was surprisingly fierce, and I'd prefer a place I can cool off while I fiddle with my phone. Well, there was a Kagoshima-style ramen place nearby, and I was really curious to see what it was like, so I headed there. The ramen shop wasn't too large, but it was almost packed to the brim with locals, and that's always an assuring sign that the ramen's going to be good. After seated, I was handed a menu. To call it a menu would be a bit of a stretch because there were only 3 items: ramen, ramen large, and rice. In a fight, you should fear the man who has trained one punch 10,000 times. And at lunchtime, you should respect the ramen shop that has perfected just one bowl of ramen. The place was running like a well-oiled machine. You got one pair of hands on noodle duty, and another for the chashu, bean sprouts, and everything else. The ramen came in a very light chicken-based broth. The noodles were chewy, and the bean sprouts were crunchy. It was a stark contrast to the rich, dense Hakata-style tonkotsu ramen, and very refreshing to say the least. Now, I won't put on my influencer voice and say it was mind-blowing or a must-try. This is a great bowl of ramen made by ordinary people who've devoted decades to their craft. They don't deserve to be patronized like that. Ramen has always been my favorite dish when traveling in Japan, not just because it's usually cheap and tastes great, but because there's so much variety to it. The local ramen is always slightly different in the next city you visit, but it's always a reflection of the local culture, and people are always proud of it. The ramen itself becomes a part of the adventure. Finishing everything in my bowl, I made up my mind to do what I did in Fukuoka, head to a vantage point to see the city from above, and decide where to go next from there. In Kagoshima, that vantage point would be Shirayama. The observation deck there is a perfect place to get a panoramic view of the entire city, with Sakurajima, the live volcano, in the background. It was such an obvious choice. So I set off. I adore sunny days like this, and it was probably the most gorgeous day I've ever had in Japan. The sky stretched out in a deep, endless blue, and the mildly hot but not unpleasant temperature was the definition of a Nankoku vibe. I was waiting for a bus called the Kagoshima City View, which shuttles between the major attractions in the city. The bus has a few different designs, all of which are pretty cute, though I do hope it doesn't confuse the hell out of some unfortunate first-time Japan tourists who keep finding new buses they don't recognize. The bus showed up before long and I got on as soon as it stopped. The interior of the bus was like a Disney ride, with wood veneers and bronze accents on the railings. It was surprisingly effective at creating an atmospheric experience considering how simple it was. I frankly really enjoyed it, and I found myself growing fond of the city much faster than I expected. The trip to the Shirayama parking lot took about 10 minutes, and from there it was only a short walk to the observatory. The park looked like that it would be a popular tourist spot. There were plenty of storefronts on the side of the road, but few were open, and there just weren't too many visitors, even though it was the middle of the day. The path to the observatory was shaded by a thick canopy, broadcasting the constant summer buzz of its built-in cicada colony. It was just another beautiful summer day. With the active volcano Sakurajima looming in the background, the cityscape of Kagoshima was truly one of a kind. In the distance, I spotted a military vessel anchored in Kagoshima Bay. While editing this video, I figured out that it was JS Bungo, a minesweeper ship from the JMSDF, and the ship would be open to the public just 3 days later. If I'd known about it, I might have considered adding it to my itinerary, but it's too late now. Before I knew it, half an hour had passed, and most of the people who had arrived with me on the same bus had already left. But I didn't plan to go just yet. There's no schedule pushing me onward, and I didn't feel the need to rush. The peaceful view of the city, the gentle summer breeze, the ferry to Sakurajima going back and forth in the distance, all seemed to ask me to stay a little longer. Then I noticed a crowd started to gather, and I had no idea what was going on. I figured maybe 2 or more buses had arrived at the same time and didn't think much of it. As I was setting up my shot amidst the confusion, an elderly gentleman with a camera came over and tried to talk to me in Japanese. I quickly explained that I don't speak their language much, to which he replied that he doesn't speak much English either, and there doesn't seem to be a problem. We both laughed, and what followed was what I call an impromptu language exchange session. I spoke in broken Japanese and he did his best with his English. He asked about my camera, so we started talking about photography and traveling. I showed him where I had been and where I planned to go next. I also mentioned that I didn't make it to Yakushima, and he told me that he actually lived there for a while and showed me pictures of places I didn't get to see. Then, out of curiosity, I asked him why so many people had gathered, and he seemed surprised. "Don't you know about the launch?" he asked. "Wait, what launch?" I replied. That's when I heard a cheer from the crowd. He quickly pointed his lens towards Sakurajima and gestured me to do the same. "This launch," he said. It felt like something out of a dream. Everything just seemed unreal. If my Yakushima trip hadn't been cancelled, I would never have given Kagoshima a chance. And if I hadn't come here, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to sit here and admire the views. If I hadn't decided to stay a little longer to soak in the vibe, I wouldn't have had that conversation, or learned about the rocket launch, let alone witnessed it myself in that fleeting 30-second window. It made me realize how a whole chain of events had to unfold just as they did, to lead me to this moment. It felt like everything had a purpose, and they were all parts of a bigger design I couldn't see at the time. I was grateful I had given Kagoshima a chance. It was absolutely worth it. But the day wasn't over yet, and I have chosen my next destination. But I won't spoil it. It's somewhere in this shot. Take a guess. People were still talking and laughing as they made their way toward the entrance. The Oji-san bid me farewell before we parted ways, and I have my own bus to catch. The bus took us downhill. The sun sifted through the canopy into the windows, creating pockets of light a few seconds at a time. I had to make a few transfers before I get to the next place, but I don't mind transfers, because how else would I get to see the gang getting walked on a leash, trams hang out after work, and get reunited with the train I met in Shigatomi Station yesterday. After flooding the fare box with a barrage of coins like a middle-aged Japanese man with his ball bearings at a pachinko machine, I got off the bus. It's all walking from here. For those of you that guessed I would visit Sakurajima, that's unfortunately not the right answer. Even though I'm getting closer to the port, I had no intention to cross the Kagoshima Bay. I already said that I'll be visiting a larger volcano down the line, so Sakurajima won't be on my list for today. The closer I got to the sea, the fewer people there were, but the number of these little buddies were on the rise. That's not very ladylike. In the distance, Sakurajima was casually puffing out a plume of smoke into the clouds, reminding everyone that it's very much alive. The sun was dipping lower, casting everything in a warm, golden hue. It had been almost a half-hour walk, and the injury in my foot was getting worse. I was almost at my limit. But was it worth it? Well, see for yourself. The amber sunlight spilled gently across the sea, turning the sky into soft shades of blue and gold. The two lighthouses stood in silence, overseeing the vessels setting out on their voyages. Forgive me for the lack of flowery rhetorics, but words pale in describing the serenity in the moment. That's what 4K videos are for. But it's one of those moments when you can feel your mind sinking into a dense calmness with no escape. The warmth inside you is intense, and you are eager for entrance. But you won't find it if you look for it. You have to step back, feel the waves brushing against the concrete dam below. You will know it when you are ready. The locals had beat me to it onto the breakwater with their fishing rods. As an outsider, I was only naturally ignored. When I got closer, I couldn't help but notice how simple yet elegant the lighthouse was. The exterior was tiled with fine, glossy mosaics, which gave it that brilliant shine under the sunlight. According to the plaque, it had been standing here for just a little more than half a century. I wonder what was it like when it first lit up. Did people back then come here to fish too? By the way, I never quite understood the appeal of fishing. You sit there alone for hours on end, catch something if you get lucky, nothing if you don't. Most of the time, you don't even take your catch home with you. What's the point then? And this is coming from a guy whose hobby is staring at parking lots, old train stations, and shopping arcades. Wait a second, I think I'm onto something. If fishing isn't about the fish,
She's made of wood, and therefore...
it is just like traveling without predetermined destinations. The point is to enjoy the ride, not to end it. It's such a perfect analogy. Now fishing. I approve. Before I knew it, it was almost sunset. The sun gradually sank towards the horizon as shadows and reflections began to take over. The original plan was to stay longer to see if the lighthouses would light up after dark. And I would be lying if I say that I wasn't at least a little disappointed to find out they only had tiny, dim bulbs instead of the grand, sweeping searchlights I'd imagined. What was I expecting? As soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, There was a sudden drop in temperature, and the wind started howling. It was getting a little scary, so I took that as my signal to leave. A shiny old Toyota took me through the night of Kagoshima. I sat in the back, watched the numbers on the meter ticked up as my blood pressure rised along with it. I never expected Kagoshima to be such an enchanting old city that I ended up loving so wholeheartedly, and it made me a little sad that I'll probably never manage to see it again, not anytime soon anyway. It still felt like a dream, that a day I never planned became a day I loved the most. I don't know if everything happens for a reason, or if being denied access to Yakushima was just Japan's way of saying, dude, slow down. There's still plenty to see before you head to that super specific place, geez. But what I do know is this. There will always be setbacks in your journey, but if you're willing to embrace them, you might just stumble upon something special that is to be remembered. Okay, that's enough yapping. The day is coming to an end, but my trip across Kyushu is far from over. This is only the 4th day into my journey, and in the next episode, I'll make a brief stop at Kumamoto and visit the largest active volcano in Japan from there. I'll see you in the morning. Oh, and I had Dongbei at a Lawson that night, but you already knew that. Take care.
今ここで
うんふん。
こうやってライト
ああ、
うん、
ありがとうございます。